Today we have Aliza Carpio with us. She's currently a director, tech evangelist at Autodesk. She's also an inventor with over 10 filed patents. It's something that was once my dream to have some patents, and I think that's really cool that you have that. Not just one, 10. Another thing she does outside work is that she helps female-owned micro businesses grow their businesses and also coaches San Diego-based startups on design thinking. And we're going to touch upon design thinking. She also co-founded San Diego's Design Week. So design thinking is a big theme that's going to permeate today's conversation. And she's also the host of Tech Heroes Powered by Intuit podcast. So she knows this podcast world quite well. So welcome, Aliza.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. An honor to be here and so grateful to spend the time with you.
So am I. Now, I'm going to quote you something you said in another one of your presentations. You said that communication, written and spoken, is one of the most underrated skills at university, but number one skill needed as technologists to grow. And I couldn't agree more. I struggled with communication. I was great at everything else, but I struggled with communication. Aliza, have you received or had an aha moment after receiving feedback on something that related to your communication?
First of all, I love the fact that you mentioned design thinking because this is an iterative process. And I have to be honest, this is a practice. I would say my first ever time when I was given feedback was pretty new engineer. And I was in tech. I still am in tech, but it was my first real job outside of internships. And I was asked by my tech lead, hey, we're going to present to the CIO on our initiative that we're working on. Can you take the lead and create a draft? Of course, I was like, yes, yeah, I'll do it. And I don't want to date myself, but it was around a voice over IP, which like it sounds like so freaking old now, but it was a voice over IP and it was a project because the company at the time had just opened an office in India. And so I spent, oh my gosh, I think he gave me he said, we're going to talk to the CIO in 3 weeks. And so from that moment on, it became like my side job to put together this presentation. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't ask too many questions. I knew what we needed to talk about. He just gave me like, hey, Lisa, we just want to tell them where we're at and where we're going and what we've accomplished so far. I'm like, sure, that sounds awesome. I proceeded to create a set of PowerPoint slides. And I love that you quoted me because no one teaches you at school how to create a PowerPoint presentation. You do it for class, but the teacher never, or your professor never looks at your stuff and says, oh, you should have emphasized this or that. As long as you got your PowerPoint put together, it was fine because it was really about that project and the stuff that you did in computer lab that mattered. But let me tell you, I ended 2 weeks later, my tech lead and I met, and we were going to go over my slides. And I had sent it to him as a pre-read because he wanted it like 2 days before. And he started off with a smile and he's, Aliza, I can tell you put a lot of work in this. I'm like, yeah, really? You can really tell? And I was like so eager. Again, first job out of college. And he said, let me tell you what this is like. We're probably going to get maybe 5 to 7 minutes, maybe. You created over 50 slides. And I'm like, yeah, but okay, I wanted you to know, and I wanted everyone to know that we did our job. We did all the due diligence and that I knew what I was talking about. And I had all the data and created all these different ways to show the data and the testing. And he's, Aliza, at the end of the day, it isn't about showing how thorough we were. That's a given. What it's about is being able to help the senior leaders understand where we are so that they can make decisions on investment. That was the biggest freaking aha for me because I was so focused on showing up as me and showing up as here is everything that I know that I didn't even think about who was going to receive it. It's like showing up to a soccer game, but what I did was I studied every sport that the Olympics had, and I was going to be ready for whatever sport, but it was a soccer game at the end of the day. And so that was actually my first foray into understanding what does it take to really think about what you communicate to your audience? How do you iterate on the feedback? How do you actually position yourself, not just as someone who's presenting, but as also a thought leader so that senior leaders and your peers can have confidence in your work? So that's a lot to consider. And yet, no one teaches you that at uni. but it is expected once you are starting to work, right? I make a joke around the fact that even interns ask me what's the best way to write an email to like their manager or a senior leader. And I realize, oh my gosh, I remember struggling with the same. How do you actually express your point of view? If code is the expression of your idea, how do you take those words and do the same thing? Express the idea behind it and the intent. So that was my first feedback. I know, I guess I can just keep going, but that lesson stayed with me. I'm still not a great PowerPoint person. By background, I'm a back-end engineer. So I'm really great at circles and squares and arrows, but that's pretty much it. But when I decided to go into product management, then there was another big kind of aha moment and another big set of feedback on that, because guess what? I didn't get my MBA, I have a master's, but not in business administration. And I remember that the project I was working on had a lot to do with incremental revenue week over week during tax season. I worked for TurboTax. And every time I presented, even though it was 1 or 2 slides, I always felt like there was more questions than there were words on my slides. And I couldn't figure out why the heck people were just like, I don't know, taking me apart almost. That's what I felt. It felt almost an attack. And then I was working with a finance partner. Her name was Ivy. Sorry, Ivy, I'm just using your name, but it's true. I remember every time she spoke, all I saw were nods in the room and maybe one question, but everyone understood where she was coming from. And there was none of this like feeling like she was being attacked or being like questioned of where her data was coming from. So I actually asked to have lunch with her, not just in a meeting, but just have lunch with her. When we were having lunch, and I said, Ivy, okay, can you please teach me? I've been watching you. Can you please teach me what it is that you do where when you go in there, you're as smooth as silk, man. There is no ruffling of feathers. And yet when I go in there, I sometimes feel like I got tarred and feathered. And she asked me one question. She asked, how much time do you spend working with your stakeholders before you actually go in front of all of them, right? And then some. And I asked her, what does that mean? And she said, I spend time thinking about who my 2 to 3 key stakeholders are. And I meet with them on the data I'm going to present to get their feedback so I could iterate and make sure that I have the right point of view when I present my data in front of the larger audience. So that's actually my second big thing, right? So the first was knowing your audience and understanding the constraints. But the second is to take time to really manage the expectations of your stakeholders. And so those two still resonate with me. And yes, I'm still the same backend engineer. It is still all circles and squares. I look at on my PowerPoint, but I am taking the time. I do spend a lot of time working with my stakeholders, and I do spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is the right level, what is the right kind of information that I need to present to help senior leaders and my peers make decisions and feel confident. And that's probably long.
That's a great story. Those 2 stories are so insightful, not only from a communication perspective in terms of engaging the stakeholders, understanding what they want and delivering that, but also how you went about the whole situation. And even some considerations around, because you were the first story was right out of college. So it was very early on. And you even mentioned at the beginning, I didn't ask any questions.
Yes, I didn't.
I'd love to know why you didn't ask it, because it's a big task, right? To craft a presentation for the CIO. In the moment, why did you not ask more questions to get a better understanding of what was expected from you?
Oh my gosh, of course, now we're older and wiser and can look back, right? I'll be honest with you. I thought in my 20s, I knew more than I really knew. And now that I'm older, I'm like, I know even less than when I got out of school. So let's just be honest. And then it really makes me think about this quote that I have up by my computer, which is from Rumi, which says, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. And I will say, I want to be wise. I'm not there yet. I'm not there. I'm not anywhere near that. I looked at everything as I want to get an A. I want to knock it out of the park. I want to get an A plus and maybe some extra credit. And I thought it was enough that I was given my constraints by my tech lead. the 2 or 3 sentences he gave me. I'm like, yeah, okay, I got it. And then just proceeded to freaking dive into the deep end and just, I'm going to pull every data. I think I worked 2 straight weekends and that night putting this thing together because I was so determined that, and it wasn't necessarily that I wanted to make a name for myself. I was just so proud of the work that we were doing that I wanted you to know that we were thorough. It was almost like not just proving to myself that the work that we did was great, but also being able to share like, hey, you're never going to question us about how thorough we were. But that was the freaking dialogue in my head. That's not even what they wanted. What they wanted to know was where are you going and what help do you need, including like what money or investment do we need to make? I'm like, but yes, I think I had a different pursuit. I had a different set of goals. And I think as you get older and as you get more mature and more experience, you realize that it isn't all about you. At the end of the day, it's still about the business and delivering for customers and delivering for our shareholders. And you have to really think about, as you said, that newbie, right? You have to shed that newbie-ness and actually ask questions. And it isn't because you don't want to do the work or that you need every guidance under the sun, but it's really about how do you ensure that you answer the key questions? How do you ensure that it's not about the thoroughness of the background, it's about the thoroughness of what those people expect or what your audience or your customers, I guess your partners expect, right? Really understanding their needs. And so you're really you are solving for customer needs at that point. But at the end of the day, it is about solving for the business and not necessarily solving for how thorough I was. But yeah, like now I can laugh about it. I know when you and I were first talking, I still laugh about it because I still think about that time when, man, I thought I had it. And then, but I have to say that 50 some odd page set of slides became almost my Bible. So in a way, it wasn't throwaway work. I would refer to it like for a while, right? And use some parts of it for my data. So it wasn't throwaway, but I did overdo it. Like it's like trying to use the same tool for everything when you don't need to pound it with a hammer. But yeah, a lot of learning.
A lot of learnings. And the other thing you did, which I thought was great, was you were attentive to what was happening when you presented and when your colleague presented. And because you noticed, you were attentive that she was sailing smooth, silky smooth in her presentations, and yours was being attacked and challenged all the time. You invited her to lunch. You were very proactive and asked her, hey, what's going on? And in that moment, you learned something very powerful that you were able to then implement and make sure that you were building those stakeholder alliances and managing those expectations. But you were very proactive about it. And I thought that was it's a great learning as well from your story.
I think there is so much to be said around emulating, right? We have people talk about mentorship and it's so formal, but sometimes mentorship is really about the emulation of behaviors of others, and they might be a more passive mentor, if you will. So I think take those moments. That's my one advice. Take those moments to emulate someone you admire. There's a reason why there's something they're doing right. And I'm sure they too learned it from someone else. So I think there's power in really learning from others, but really what is that? Something about flattery. The best flattery is about emulation, but really emulating those who you admire is the easiest way to learn.
Yeah, a quick side note, which is I like to watch these nature documentaries, and it's fascinating how, especially with the monkeys and the apes, how they learn in those 10 years that they spend with their extended family by observing and emulating how they learned everything they need to succeed in the forest by themselves. It's the same for us. We just need to choose wisely who we're going to emulate and then do it.
Oh my gosh, that is very insightful. I love that. Yeah, you're right. Because animals do that in the wild already. Gosh, I sometimes think we need to be reminded that those before us or around us are our teachers. So I love that.
Yeah. And another thing you shared with me previously, and as soon as you said it, I said, yes, we're going to talk about this, which is that you used to rehearse presentations to death.
Yes.
And
Yes.
don't we do that as women? We rehearse to death because we want to prove ourselves. So why were you doing that? Why were you rehearsing to death?
I think it was also this pursuit of perfection, which I know that the founder of Girls Who Code, when, Brave Not Perfect is our book, that pursuit of perfection actually gets in the way of growth. I think there is no such thing with BS to go after perfection, especially when you're presenting, because it isn't about perfection, it's about connection, especially when you're presenting or communicating or even writing a blog. It's about how do you connect, right? Now writing a blog, you do need to have good grammar, right? Spell things properly and all that. And there's many tools for that. There's even AI tools like ChatGPT that you could use for that. But I was again, as I look back, I think about the fact that I was in such pursuit of perfection because I wanted to prove something. I wanted to be seen. And I think as a woman in tech, when you are sometimes the only one in the room, like the only engineer that's not a guy in the room, or the only one who feels like has a different perspective. There's this dialogue in your mind that you need to be perfect because there's so much pressure in the way that you put on yourself. And then you realize that pressure is something that's just happening within you, and others aren't actually expecting that. I think as women in tech, there is a lot to be said around. I even spoke to a couple of VPs before at Autodesk where we talked about like trauma, and where we talked about, I called it like the stripes you earn, right? On your shoulder. If you were in the military, I earned the stripe, man, because I went through this pain. But I think as you again gain the experience and knowledge, and also I hope that people out there do reach out to mentors and coaches, because there's something to be said about learning from others and getting guided, because we don't know everything. But when I was for a while there, and I'll give you an example, we used to or at least in my past at Intuit, we would do these things called product reviews. And many times our founder, Scott Cook, would be in those meetings. It's a little bit, I'll be honest, it's nerve-wracking to know that the founder is going to be there. Scott Cook, even today, is very active in coaching. So we would do these product reviews. And in the beginning, each one of us that were product managers or a dev manager that would go in front, we would present our data, we would present what we're doing, and then we would ask the question, how could we make things better? But I was so focused on being so perfect in my presentation that I sometimes didn't invite feedback or questions. It was almost like the way I said it was almost like matter of fact. And then I would go, oh yeah, I'm supposed to ask you for feedback. But I had focused so much on being perfect. And what I got in one of these meetings, I think it was after one of these product reviews, the founder said something to me. He said something to me first because I think I was one of the first at that time that openly showed their tattoos on their arms. So I had a pretty big tat on my left. I have a sleeve on my left arm. And then he said something to me after he said something about my tattoo and asked me what it was about. That he said, if you treat your senior leaders and those above you just like your peers, they do the same. And I realized like I probably was doing what I was doing in a bit, sometimes out of fear of being looked at as not qualified. I wouldn't call it an imposter syndrome. I just wouldn't call it that. I think there was this thing in my mind, and lately I've been learning a lot about the journey of an immigrant, and I did immigrate here for college. I think there's a lot so there's a lot there, right? I'm an immigrant, came here for college, a woman in, there's a lot. I'm Asian, also grew up in Asia and parts of Asia. And so there's a lot that I feel like I had to overcome. And I think sometimes when you're not perfect, at least this is what I was taught, right? And that's partly why I was always trying to get A's or A pluses, is because if you're not perfect, then there's this judgment. And yet, again, we are human beings, we are imperfect. And it's never about perfection. It's about connection. It's about progress. It's about growth. And none of those means that you start from a place of perfection. All of those start at a place of being open to learning and making mistakes. So I made a lot of mistakes, and I continue to make a lot of mistakes. And I hope to continue to keep making mistakes because it's when I learn the most. And I sometimes fall flat on my face. I've had interviews even where I'm like, why did I do it that way? I could have done it a different way where that didn't go well. But I learned from them. And I think taking risks in learning isn't something that is going to be so detrimental. Some people go, oh my God, if I don't get it right and don't get it perfect, I won't have another chance. The reality, it's not life. There's always going to be a freaking other chance. Maybe not in exactly the same environment or same problem set, but there's going to be another chance. And I hope that as people hear the story from me, that they realize that maybe they're doing the same thing. Maybe they over practice. And I'll be honest, you and I met and I know what we were going to talk about, but I'm like, I don't know how this is going to go. She's going to ask me questions, I'm sure. But there was no way that I could rehearse for this because it's all about sharing my stories and my experience from the past. And if I'm not going to, I don't regret anything. I don't regret doing some of the things that I've done, which is not ask questions or like over rehearse, because now I can tell people who over rehearse, which I do. People always come to me because I speak at a lot of conferences. Aliza, how should I do this? And I could tell they're over rehearsing because when I ask them a question, they go, wait, let me go back through my notes. I'm like, oh man, you're over rehearsed. No one's going to have time for you to go back through your freaking index cards for you to find that point. Right. So I think because of those not mistakes, because of those lessons, I think I know we talk about being authentic and that's a huge part of leadership. But I think if we can all be open again to saying, I'm going to learn, I'm going to be open to learning, which means most likely I'm not going to know everything. And no one knows everything. No one. That I think there's so much more that people could see in you. People could you could be invited in more versus, oh, she knows everything, so we don't need to invite her to this conversation.
Yeah. And it aligns with the first thing, the first stories that you shared, in the sense that a lot of these challenges come when we're so focused in ourselves and our image and how people are going to perceive us that we fail to focus and actually be able to connect with whom we're talking to and have that impact that we would like. And it stifles us a little bit from that ability to engage with others. Like you said, failure is a natural thing. I did some research and I found that for TED Talks, the best TED Talks happen when people rehearsed like 100 times. So I had a goal of rehearsing 100 times. I did not rehearse 100 times. And that's after it's been like semi-memorized. I rehearsed about 50 times and I shared that with a really good friend who's very direct. And this friend, his response was, if somebody were rehearsing that hard for a presentation, I'd fire them.
What?
There's no reason someone should rehearse that much for anything. And I thought that was interesting. There are people that have a very different perspective on rehearsal. And it's interesting that you brought that up because most people, when I talk to them, they say, no, I need to rehearse a lot. I need to be over prepared, which also limits other things because it doesn't give you that ability to adapt with the situation, but also to experiment and do more things. I love your story around the feedback that you got and just treat people like they're normal people. You don't have to always prove everything to everyone and be perfect in front of everyone. How do you know that you've rehearsed enough? Because that's always a difficult decision because often we don't feel like we're ready until we've over rehearsed. So how do you know it's time to stop?
I don't think I even have an answer for this. When I prepare for any talk, to be honest, I actually write my whole dialogue. Like I write it down, right? And I write it in a way of how I actually would speak. And then after that, I walk away from it and I give myself at least a couple of days. I walk away from it and I take that writing, and usually it's 2 or 3 pages or even longer. And then I just take a highlighter and I figure out from that, what do I really need to make sure I remember? Now, when you write an abstract for a conference or a meetup, you always have to end with takeaways, right? Like you always have to share with your audience, with the submission committee, review committee, what you're going to be teaching and what people are going to take away. You need to actually remember that. If you can't go back to those 3 to 5 points that you promised your audience, you've over rehearsed because you need to, at the end of the day, the reason why people chose to go to your talk is because they're going to learn these 1 to 3 to 5 things that was in your abstract. So when I go back and I highlight the points from the thing that I wrote, I go back to that abstract and I say, okay, are these things that I highlighted related back to what I promised the audience? If it doesn't, I remove it. What I do, and I'll be honest with you, I spend more time on the abstract and the key takeaways than on rehearsal, because the abstract for me is the shortened version of what I'm going to say anyways. When I rehearse, I normally just do it as chapter headings. So I will, and with Zoom lately, if I do a virtual presentation, I just have a big sticky note with my chapters headings. I don't have any words beyond that because I know that I always have nerves. I don't know about you, but I always have nerves and I'll always stumble a little bit. I might crack up on something that I'm saying because I have cracked up on myself, which I think, I don't know, some people like just think that it's fun to have that, like it makes you real. But I don't have a formula for you in terms of how do I know. What I do know is that if your rehearsal gets to a point where, oh, by the way, you should always time yourself. I think that's the number one thing that I do is I always have my phone is always on a timer because I know every talk has specific amount of minutes. If I don't hit those, again, those takeaways within those minutes, I have to re-rehearse because you have to get it to a point where did you deliver that promise? I want to share something also on perfection that I know we're talking about presentations and communication. I actually did 18-month stint in marketing when I was at Intuit. I left engineering. I was a dev manager at the time. And then I wanted to learn about marketing and that side of the business. And it was interesting because I never got this feedback when I was in engineering. But the feedback that I got, I remember after my first 6 months was Aliza waits for her data to be perfect before she actually makes a decision or presents anything. And when I first got that, because I actually get verbatims, when I first got that, this is what went through my mind. No, duh, you should have perfect data. Coming from engineering, I always look at my logs. And so I want to make sure I have good data and perfect and blah, blah, blah. And I realized that that was the wrong way of thinking. I remember speaking to my boss who basically, and again, at the time I was working at TurboTax, and she said, did you know that at TurboTax, the tax season is not a whole year? The tax season is actually 3 weeks out of the year. So when we make decisions, we make it on a daily or sometimes twice a day basis. We don't have always perfect data. We have the data that we have at the time and the knowledge and experience from the past. And that actually opened up my mind to, whoa, so I was not moving forward to learn, to experiment. I wasn't experimenting on any of my campaigns. I wasn't trying things out with my customers because I was so bent on waiting for that perfect data. And again, going after perfection because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making a mistake. When in reality, what the business wanted was to take risks with calculated risks with the data that you have. And again, with some knowledge from the past, because there's enough patterns from the past that you could look at and say, that's not going to work, or this is going to work, or what we've tried. But I realized that so much in such a short amount of time in fast-paced kind of environment where you're having to make decisions that could cost millions of dollars, you're not always going to get that perfect data. And it's a shift for those of you out there that are in engineering that's going to go into like marketing or sales. There's going to be a part of it there's going to be a part of you that's going to struggle with this. I know I did. And I heard I'm not the only one where you're constantly trying to figure out when are you going to push the button to do that experiment or to try that campaign. So I definitely learned again. Did I miss an opportunity here and there? Yes, I probably did. Again, those are the opportunities that my manager then took to like course correct me. And I think, again, being open to learning and going, oh my gosh, what worked for you in the past of having really good data and looking at logs and making sure that your system and the health of your services are great isn't going to be the same here, right? It's going to be different. So you're going to need to think differently and you're going to need to not use the same tool set. Because I was basically trying to use the same tool set that I had from engineering into marketing and trying to perfect that. And again, that's not going to work. And it's the same way around too, to go to engineering. And I don't know anyone who's done that to go the other way around, but I'm sure that they probably have felt the same kind of transition.
Yeah, I love that story as well, because it goes back to that idea of experimentation, of understanding. In that case, your, let's say, client is internal and they wanted something from you. They wanted you to experiment, to make decisions quicker, even with imperfect data, but you didn't quite understand that. Now, what's wonderful is how you've been able to take all of these experiences and learn and perfect yourself in your own communication, given these things are not taught in university. So you've taught yourself in a way, but by getting and incorporating all that feedback and those learnings that you've had in these different roles and from these different mentors, because like you said, it does vary depending on where you are. I think another lesson from that is it's really important to, in a role, align with the person that you're dealing with or your stakeholders, and understand, or your customers, and really understand what the expectations are. Because if we don't, then we end up doing things based on what we know, what we think is best. But everybody has everybody's different, and each area is different. Like you said, that the tools are different in different situations, and we never know everything. So it's just getting that alignment ahead of time can save so much of our effort. Like the presentation with 50 slides, you could have saved some time there in your weekends. Like this situation. But the good thing is that you learn with it. You learn with those examples.
Yes, thank you. They were painful, but I learned, and you
Great learning.
survive. You survive. You really do. When Brene Brown says that we are wired for struggle, we really are wired for that. But it does take an open mindset. It does take a mindset to say that I'm not going to know everything. I'm going to be open to learning. And I know some coaches will say it's good for you to enter each day as saying, I know nothing, so that you can be open to learning.
Yeah, and you definitely are. And for everyone listening, it's inspiring to see, hey, we've all made mistakes. I've made so many mistakes, probably more mistakes than getting things right. Now, the ability to be able to move forward with that and learn that. And in your case, you're also teaching that. You're teaching and sharing through your mistakes so that other people don't have to make the same mistakes, which is so helpful. And you're also really contributing a lot in this area of design thinking in San Diego. So what would you say are how can we apply some of the design thinking principles to communicating and speaking our mind?
Oh, thanks for that question. I really love it. So at a high level, for those that don't know what design thinking is, that actually a framework by which it's an iterative framework by which you are solving problems for your customers. And the way that it works is you basically are constantly open to getting feedback so that you can iterate and then respond back to customers' needs. At the end of the day, your true north is about delivering value and impact for your customer. But you have to realize that whatever you put out there, your beautiful child, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation or a code or an app out there, right? That it isn't infallible. And that if you really want to solve the problem or really want to deliver impact for the world or for your customer, you've got to be open to iterating and being open to getting the feedback. So in terms of how do I use that today, it's in everything that I do. I always talk about everything as a grand experiment. But in communications, I believe in the first draft. And in fact, I don't call it the first draft. I always start with people have seen this on my PowerPoint or even on my blogs. It's always 0.5. I always like I'll have the title and I'll always say something like, this is a working title. It might not be great, so please help me. And then I always have a V 0.5. And so everyone knows that's her first thing. It's not imperfect. I know some people put draft everywhere, but I'm like, whatever. For me, it's 0.5. 0.5 draft means this is just all me. I might have taken some feedback from others, but it's very minimal feedback. And I basically say to people when I Slack them or send them an email to take a look at it, or when I send them a Gmail, I always tell people I have no ego on this writing. So hack away, edit away, give me every comment you've got because it can only get better from here. My version 1.0 usually takes all of those feedback and incorporates it. And then what I do with 1.0, and again, you'll see my blogs or my PowerPoint with V 1.0, then I take that to another set of customers, which is normally a narrower set. It's usually the set that actually will most likely be the folks that could represent it, meaning like it could be my boss or my boss's boss that will represent it somewhere. And then I try to get feedback, but I don't give it like blanket on an email. I actually meet with them to share how I'm looking at it. I usually do send it the night before as pre-read, and then usually we talk it through. So my 1.0 is a narrower set of stakeholders. It's usually in person or on Zoom. And then by then, after 1.0, sometimes I have a 1.5, but by 2.0, I feel good enough to actually share that with a broader audience. And then again, I'm still open for feedback. I always still just share, folks, I've gotten feedback from this group and that. If you're not, I usually say, if your group is not represented here and needs to be, please do add it, because I don't know what I don't know. And so usually by 3.0, it's locked and loaded and it's ready to be presented. So that's an iterative process, and being very intentional of calling my versions in these fractions, if you will, helps people feel that I'm inviting them and that it's not perfect and it's not 100% ready. And if you say, I have no ego with this, I'm trying to present our work or the initiative, or I'm trying to present the problem properly or the opportunity space properly, people will be open to actually helping you with it. And that's really what it is. At the end of the day, I am asking for help. I don't know everything. And again, I'm older now and more mature to know that I don't know everything. So that iterative process that enables me to really deliver for the intended customer, the intended audience of my PowerPoint or my blog or my presentation somehow.
I could see myself using that for many different ways. It's not just a presentation. I think that version control, people can use that not only for something formal that they need to deliver, but also if one of the big things that I see a lot of women in particular struggle with, because of what you mentioned today, the perfection and all of that, is when they're in meetings and they have an idea, they don't want to contribute it. They don't want to say it out loud because it hasn't been fully formulated. Mm-hmm. So these half-baked ideas or these draft ideas never get shared by them often. And using a method like this of design thinking, or just thinking in that iterative way, saying, hey, here's my 0.5 draft initial idea. What do you think? Just no egos here, no egos. Tell me what you think. I could see that happening in a meeting, a bunch of 0.5 drafts of ideas being thrown around.
Yeah, I actually don't like it when women or men say, this might be a dumb idea, and then they say it, and I'm like, no, it's a working idea, working title. I don't know, like a draft. Just say it that way and don't give it anything else but that. But I love the fact that you caught on the fact that it is version control. You can't get the engineer out of me. So yeah, having that version, and I actually did not come with that on my own. I actually saw that in papers that I would read from software architects. And I saw that what they would do was they put it on Google Docs, right? And they would say, it's open for comments. And they would have these versions. And I'm like, that's amazing. And they would have a table at the top of their paper where they have 0.5, the date, and then what it's about and who contributed. And they tracked it of who contributed and what were the big changes. And so I love that tracking, but I took it in a different way of not necessarily just tracking the audience and what I changed, but like really changing my methodology so that 0.5 is broad, it's on Slack or on Google Docs. 1.0 is I'm going to meet with you because I really need like guidance. 2.0 is even narrower. And then by 3.0, it's for my intended audience. I just think it makes it less scary. Like you said, like it makes it less scary. It also enables you to show up open to being part of a community. Technologists or even software engineers, this is a team sport. And whatever your role is in tech, you are part of a community. There's a reason why it isn't a one-person team, right? We all work in teams. And if we can just be open to saying that you don't know everything, saying that, hey, I really value your input in this because this is what I got. And it's okay to smile and say, okay, this is what I got, y'all. Help me. It also makes it feel open for everyone else to do the same. Sometimes, like now as a director, some people think that if they don't know me, that, oh, I have to deliver something like super perfect to her. I don't like, I'll ask for something and they'll go, oh, Lisa, I need another 2 weeks or a week or whatever. I'm like, I'm not asking for perfection, right? Have you seen my stuff? Because if you've seen my stuff, you're going to go, oh, that's what you mean? I'm like, yeah, I just want like a drawing, a box, some circles, and some arrows. And they realize, oh, because then, gosh, that would be such a great world where we can all learn from one another instead of being so competitive and being perfect amongst each other. I think it's important that we all learn that we are part of a community, that we all get better as we grow together and as we learn from one another.
Yeah, and I think that's a great vision of a world and of teams and of how organizations operate. And I think that even if leaders adopt some of these strategies that you shared and share those with their team, so let's say everyone understands that there are these 4 levels of drafts and everybody has a common language around that, I think it could help people feel more open to iterate, help the team feel like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to be judged because it's a formal thing. There is this formal 0.5 control system, and there is this thing where I'm expected to do a drawing with circles and boxes and just highlight some preliminary ideas that can be completely wrong. And that's okay. That's actually expected of me. I think that will start creating that culture at all levels so that everyone can function together in this design thinking experimentation way.
Oh, I love that. It wasn't too long ago where I had an engineer. No, it wasn't an engineer. He's a dev manager now. I remember he said one of the best invention ever was this dry erase board. And if we can all just think about how we work as a dry erase board, where we can put up ideas, erase it, move the arrow somewhere else, and we can all kind of work on it together, we can get to a better solution together. Because in perfection, you don't go to the dry erase board because it could be erased, right? Or it could be rerouted. But so I love that he said that to me, because then that really made me think about the impermanence of everyone's ideas. But at the same time, how beautiful is that you get, maybe you've got a different color pen, I've got a different color pen, but if we all add our ideas together, move them around, create, and we could create something even more beautiful. So I don't know. I thought that was, maybe that's not as profound, but it was profound for me.
Oh, it's so profound. For me, when you said impermanence of ideas, I thought wabi sabi of ideas. Like this just
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that. So I think if I love that whole notion too, and I think that's so much about design thinking is everything is not permanent, but we have a true north. We want to solve for our customers. We want to solve for the audience, especially when we're trying to present and get our ideas across.
this has been such a wonderful conversation. I love the whole idea. I love the way you illustrated your own stories on how you've learned this idea of let's not focus on perfection. Let's not over-rehearse to death. And let's make sure that we're focusing on connection, on the customer, on iteration, on trying to deliver value essentially, and being less focused on ourselves and more on what we're trying to achieve with other people as a unit, as a team. And as we talked about earlier, embracing the anti-perfect and the impermanence of things in order to achieve value that we want for the customer. So thank you so much for sharing all of this today.
I'm so grateful to be a guest and really looking forward to seeing this go live on your channel, and happy to share as well. Thank you.